Welcome everyone. I'm Patrick Franco from Yoga Renew.
And I'm Lindsay Monal.
And today we're here to discuss a few tips on giving hands-on assists in yoga classes. Lindsay is maybe going to start by telling you a story about when she was in a class and had a hands-on assist experience.
That went terribly wrong. Yeah. So this is like my little horror story that kind of got us talking about it. But I went to a yoga class a few years back, and it was my first time ever going to that yoga studio. And when I walked in, the teacher was the one checking people in on the iPad, and I gave her my name, she checked me in, but it was a very unfriendly interaction. Like, she wasn't very welcoming when I walked in, didn't tell me where to put my shoes or anything. So already we're off to not the best start in the class, but whatever, I put my stuff away, set myself up on my mat. And throughout the class, it was a hot yoga class, and she was offering a very powerful practice. And throughout the class, I opted to use blocks and different props in different shapes. And she came over to my mat a few times and physically moved my hand or would give me these hands-on assists that I didn't want, nor did I feel comfortable with her touching me, especially since we hadn't built that rapport. She didn't know why I was making those adjustments with my body, right? I had a knee injury that I was kind of working with, and maybe wasn't going all out in every yoga pose. And so at one point she came over and we were in chair pose, and there's an assist if you're unsure of it. You don't need to learn it ever, but I was in chair pose, and she came up behind me and squatted behind me and basically made me sit on her lap. And for me, I found that just very triggering, very uncomfortable. I did not feel comfortable with her just, sneaking up behind me, making me sit on her lap. It was just the most uncomfortable. Yeah, it was just a horrible experience. And I can't remember now if I left the class halfway through or if I finished out the class there, but it was just such a uncomfortable experience, and just felt not useful. I think after that, I told her don't touch me anymore, because she had, in the first time I had met her, had already touched me 4 times, and I just in general think that's not a great approach for any yoga teacher. So after that, I had enough power to just say set my boundary and not let her touch me anymore. But I just found that really abrasive and uncomfortable. So I would caution you all just with that story, and hopefully you can learn from my experience and you don't have to experience that yourself. But Patrick, I'd love to ask you, just kind of based on that idea, what is your suggestion when a new student comes into class? How do you approach the topic of hands-on assists there?
It's a great question. So I guess from Lindsay's story, the first tip that we would say is that for new students of yours, really try to use verbal assists, right? And use your words as best you can. And maybe over time, you build a relationship. If they continue to come back to your class and you know their practice and they know your teaching style, and then once that relationship is built between you and the students, then after those verbal assists, you would ask your student if hands-on assists are something that they would welcome.
Yeah.
And you want to talk a little bit more about that concept?
I definitely agree with that. I think you can, use your words so powerfully without ever needing to touch somebody. And I remember this was a practice that I had to do in my 300-hour training. Our teachers were trying to get us to stop demoing in front of the classes, and they made us sit in front of the class. We weren't allowed to move, and just teach the class cueing with just our language. Yeah. And I found that practice really, really helpful, because you can't then depend on your own placement of your body. You have to actually give cues that are going to be effective to the people that you're teaching. And I think that's just in general a great way for you to improve your sequencing, but also for you to learn what are the cues, what are the things that I need to say to get this person into the shape in a more comfortable or supportive way for their body, right? So instead of walking over to somebody's mat and grabbing their hips and pulling them into place, maybe you tell them, hey, can you bend your knees here and imagine that your tailbone is lifting up and back even further, right? And giving those cues also teaches the student to understand what their body should be doing without having to be forced into that position without any context around it. So I think when you can give students that information, that really empowers them to be mindful the next time they're in a class, maybe with another teacher, they know what they need to do with their body. So I definitely would agree that verbal cues can be just as, if not even more effective as hands-on assists when helping a student come into a shape.
Yeah. And now that being said, there are some times where the language is not working, and touch or a hands-on assist might guide the student in a direction that they are, for whatever reason, not able to understand with the words that you're using. And hands-on assists have been part of teaching yoga for a long, long time. And coming out of now COVID and in light of other things that are happening with inappropriate touching, the way we operate and use hands-on assist going forward is really something that we need to think about as yoga teachers, and how we want our students to experience that part of the practice.
Yeah, and I think specifically because we're going through this global pandemic, people are less comfortable with. I mean, some people are craving touch, right? I know for me, I go to a class and I'm happy the teacher can, give me as many assists as possible. But there's still some students that are coming to studios or into practice spaces and still aren't so comfortable with, physical proximity. So I would recommend to just always ask your students, and I think this goes even pre-COVID, post-COVID, whatever, always asking your students for permission before you go to touch them, and recognizing that permission can change throughout, right? So maybe a student and they come to your class every week, and most times they say, yes, you can touch me, but maybe one day they're not feeling so good, they slept weird in their shoulder or something, and maybe they don't want to be touched that day, right? So just making a habit for yourself to ask students for permission before you touch them, and just getting into that habit of always getting consent before you offer a hands-on adjustment. And I think with that as well, I know there are some studios that are offering like chips or cards that people can opt in or opt out. That's a really nice thing that some studios are doing. Another way that you can ask for permission is by asking students to opt in to touch versus asking them to opt out of touch, right? Because when we ask, raise your hand if you don't want to be touched, that implies that the student is doing something wrong because they don't want to be touched by the teacher. Versus if you ask them to actively opt into to being touched, then they're making the conscious choice of, yes, please touch me, right? Versus, oh, I don't think I want to be touched, right? It's just a more powerful affirmative question that you can ask versus asking people to opt out. So that's typically what I do if I give adjustments in Shavasana. I'll tell everyone, just give me a wave if you would like me to come and give you a shoulder assist, and it's just super helpful for myself and for the students.
Yeah. One last thing I'd like to just say is that, as a teacher, you always have to remember that you are there to serve your students, and you have to take yourself almost out of the equation. And even if you yourself as a teacher and as a practitioner of yoga have always loved hands-on assist, that you have to recognize that your students may or may not, like Lindsay said, it may be one day that they enjoyed them, and then the next day it's not the right day for them. And to constantly ask for permission to do that, is really, really important.
Yeah, great. Well, I think that wraps up. So if we were just to sum up those tips, number one is to ask for permission. The second thing was verbal cues, using verbal cues before hands-on assists. And third is ask people to opt into touch versus opting out of touch. So I hope that this was helpful for you as you start to navigate this world of teaching yoga and giving hands-on assists. My name's Lindsay.
And I'm Patrick.
Thank you so much for tuning into our channel, and be sure to subscribe for more videos like this.